Morning, my name's Simon. Welcome to Bennett's BikeSocial, welcome to Portugal, and welcome to the launch of Suzuki's 2024 GSX-S1000GX. Welcome to the first few miles. Oh no, hang on. Sorry, welcome to day 2 on a 2-day launch of Suzuki's 2024 GSX-S1000GX. And it's a good job it's a 2-day launch because there's 2 days worth of, at least, of information and technical information about this bike that we've all got to get our heads around. There's a lot going on with the GX, as you might have read or seen, because this bike has been pretty widely disseminated in the press and on video. There's a Bennett's YouTube video. We've had a bit of a deep dive on the technical aspects of the bike, or the spec. It's been at the EICMA show where it was in Milan, where it's a bit of a hit, and equally at Motorcycle Live at the NEC. So you may well know quite a lot of stuff already. And Francesca, the lead rider, who's not on a GX, she's on the GSX-S1000 GT in front of us, and you know, she just turned her indicator off. Good. So yes, wow, what a bike to get our head round. And Suzuki have got a lot riding on the GX. Literally, it's an international launch, so everybody's coming from around the world to ride this bike. There are 17 Japanese engineers here from, well, it's like downtown Hamamatsu, the hotel. It's so that's always an indication that the factory are obviously taking this bike with a great deal of seriousness. They want to know how it performs. And yesterday was a bit of a strange day, I have to say. There was a lot of stop-start, a lot of photography. Some of the roads that have been selected for the launch weren't the greatest. Suzuki are trying to show off the range of abilities of this bike, but in doing so they took us on some roads that didn't really allow us to get under the skin of the bike, really get a good ride in. So let's start with the 3 things that are new about the bike. Are, I guess, its riding position and its dynamic, because it is their first tall rounder. It is the semi-active suspension, and then it's the wealth of electronics that have been added. So they're the 3 sort of main new topics. But so let's get the bread and butter stuff out of the way first, and I'll rattle through the sort of the base conventional spec. And it is, as you know, starting with the engine, it is the cut and pasted from the GSX-S1000 GT. So it's the 999cc inline 4, originally from the GSX-R1000 K5. Have we said that often enough now? Can we stop saying that about this engine? Making 150 brake horsepower at 11,000 RPM, 78 pound-foot of torque at 9,250 RPM. And you don't come here looking for charismatic vibes and, you know, good old lumpy throbbing. You come here for inline 4 performance, and so you get a very linear exponential power curve with no dips or bumps in it. The engine character is super smooth. Inline 4s these days are incredibly smooth. All the secondary vibes are balanced out. It's a lovely unit to use. Pretty well known. You know, some modern engines have got sort of like more excessive mid-range, and maybe not as much top end as this bike. I'm thinking of the Tracer 9, for example, with 117 horsepower. So 150 is a, you know, it's a pretty healthy output. It's more than the Versys. That's down at, I think, about 118, which is a lot less than you sort of imagine it to be. There may well be a reason for that, which we'll come to later on when we're talking about stability. But anyway, so that's the engine. Yep, familiar thing. And we have Suzuki's marvellous up and down quick shifter, which I think the action is slightly improved over the GT. And also now it has the option to be used with cruise control without disengaging cruise. Again, in common with a couple of other manufacturers that are now doing that, should you feel the need. Francesca's pointing out something. I'm not sure what she's pointing out. Yeah, it's either a ship or a bird. Thank you for that. It's like having a tour guide. It's all very good. We need intercom so they can talk to us. No, let's not do that. Anyway, so that's the engine, pretty established, and again I'll talk about the character of it and how it feels towards the end of the video after I've ridden the bike a bit more. It's very pretty, nice little harbour. So anyway, where else were we? Frame, yes. Again, frame is cut and paste from the GT. It's twin aluminium, twin spar. Same swing arm. I think it has the same subframe. It might be tweaked slightly, but it's a detachable tubular subframe, as is sort of Suzuki's MO these days. And has the same 17-inch wheels as the GT, which of course is an important consideration as a tall rounder. It should have 17 or maybe 19. You can argue the point. Inch front wheels, and the same radial 4-pot radial calipers. And yeah, going back to suspension, obviously there is sort of one big difference with the GT is that we're on Showa semi-active, but that's not the only difference. The wheel travel is the other. It's 150mm, which is obviously, you know, part of the consideration of it being a tall rounder. And I'm sorry the riding's not very dynamic. Nice little buggy in front. I'm not sure what that is. A Twizy. Okay, cool. Looks like it could be fun. Just going to sneak past you, mate. So yes, 150mm is kind of banging between something like, say, an adventure bike like a V-Strom and the GT. The GT's about 120 and 130mm front and rear. And that's kind of where Suzuki positioned it, to be honest. That's actually quite a neat summation of the philosophy of a tall rounder, is that it's got the all the riding position and the sort of domineering practicality, if you like, of an adventure bike, with the sportiness of a sports tourer. For example, BMW put the S1000XR, it's listed under their sports bikes category rather than touring or travel or anything else. So yeah, 150mm, it means the seat height unfortunately has to go up. The clue's in the name, it is a tall rounder, so it's up to 845mm, over 815 for the GT. And there is a low seat option available, taking it down to 830. But that's still pretty tall, and it is still pretty exclusive for some people. Some people sort of would like all the technical aspect of this bike, but in a sort of conventionally sized suspension. But unfortunately that's not an option. So what else have we got? I'll just run through the other stuff. We have the same tank as the GT, so it's 19 litres. A little bit thirstier, this bike, possibly because of its aerodynamics, I'm not sure, but it's only marginal. And so you're still going to be getting around about, depends how you ride, it is very subjective, it's entirely dependent on how you ride. But you could get, you know, 140 miles is a worst case scenario, until the reserve light starts to make you think about pulling over. Up to, I don't know, 180 plus. Again, it depends. If you ride around at 50 miles an hour absolutely everywhere, you're probably getting on for 200 miles out of the tank. And so yeah, same 19 litre tank. Did the weight. So yeah, so that's kind of, I think, pretty much the spec as standard. And then we get onto the sort of the good stuff, or the interesting stuff, or the new stuff. And here everything gets a little bit more complicated and a little bit more nuanced. So Showa's semi-active suspension is sort of familiar if you're used to the Kawasaki Versys 1000 SE, which has the same system, similar system, not quite the same. Or Honda's Africa Twin also runs Showa semi-active suspension. So I'm sure the knowledge that Showa have gained in semi-active is transferred at some point across from manufacturer to manufacturer. Not sure how that works, but it's a similar system, so they know what they're doing. And then really it's down to sort of Suzuki's implementation of that strategy. And of course they use the same skyhook principle. That, again, can we stop saying skyhook now as well? We've been saying it for 10 years since Ducati introduced it on the Multistrada. It's actually an automotive principle. So I'm not sure who owns it. It might be Fiat, actually. I think they came up with it. But the principle is fairly well understood and well trodden. It's where the chassis of the bike is suspended. The ECU kind of knows its spatial position, and from from that, it can infer the point of keeping the bike stable and level while the suspension and the wheels bounce around underneath. And it can adapt the suspension, theoretically, to try and keep the bike as unflustered as possible. Now, there's a lot of subtleties involved in that, I'm sure, when it comes to programming that kind of system, because bikes are strange things. Riders kind of like them to be unstable a little bit, because that's what feel is. That's what makes us feel what the bike is doing. So there has to be a degree of movement. I think a bike that hovered perfectly while you rode would actually be very, very difficult to ride hard. So, so we've just pulled over now, and we just stopped for something. I think we're waiting for people to catch up. Is there, we left people behind, probably? Yeah. There we go. Come on, come on. Oh dear, someone lost. Anyway, so what was I saying? Yes, suspension. So we have Showa semi-active, and then, yeah, it's down to Suzuki's implementation of that system. And this is where it starts to get really complex, because we start talking about riding modes and everything else. So if I just stick to the suspension for the time being and try and be really quick, there are basically 3 standard modes. And quite funnily, they're called, this is medium, mad, and there's sad, which is soft, and then there's hard, which is had. Shame it wasn't brittle or something, because then it would be bad. Because mad, bad and sad would be much more interesting. But anyway, so that's your 3 basic suspension modes, and as you would expect, they kind of give the suspension ECU a kind of a target. Oh, it was the feds. Oh, that's what it is. So they give the suspension a target to aim at. We're being shadowed by the police. I wonder who they're after, Mr. Foodman or us. I think they're after us. Anyway, hi guys, you good? Hey. Happy days. It all goes off on launches. It all happens. So, yes, so 3 broad settings that sort of give you a range of damping within that. Suzuki then sort of add a little slight layer of adjustability, call it that if you want, or call it complication if you wish, because they then give you 3 extra steps of suspension adjustment either way if you choose to go into the settings and use them. So that is, by my own maths, if there's +3 and -3 plus the original setting, that makes 7 settings for each mode, and there's 3 of them, so 3 7s are 28. 28 suspension variations within the semi-active, which is good because you've got the adjustability. I'm not quite sure if hard -3 is 1 more than medium +3. There might be some degree of overlap, and I'm not sure how good you'd have to be as a rider to actually split that difference, but let's stop here. Good luck with that. So so that's your sort of your broad suspension performance in terms of its spec, and then of course that's bundled up with the sort of overall global settings. So we have 3 main drive modes, A, B and C. A is active, B is basic, C is comfort. So they've made that easy for us at least. That's really the drive mode, encapsulates the suspension setting, encapsulates throttle response, and it also encapsulates the traction control setting. Now, traction control is another thing that has some nuance to it, because it is not just TC. That's the sort of the global name for it, but it actually has 3 elements. Traction control is one, the other is anti-wheelie, and the other is roll torque control. Now, traction control and anti-wheelie are pretty easy to understand what they do. Roll torque control is again a little bit deeper to go into, and remember this is all bundled under the sort of the traction control heading. Roll torque control, forgive all the jargon, I'm sorry, but you either say this or you don't, and you do need to know. So roll torque control is where the bike is measuring your lean angle all the time, and if you're at a severe lean angle, or any lean angle, it will modulate the throttle response, the engine response, as the bike is leaned over. So the practical application of that, and it is noticeable, is that if you're in a corner and you're leant over, you open the throttle, in the sort of the lesser modes, you don't quite get the engine response you expect, because it is moderating its throttle according to lean angle. And then as the bike comes upright, even though you haven't really opened the throttle anymore, the bike will begin to produce more power and make more power output. Now, I think Suzuki claim this is a first, but they have to be a little bit careful, because I'm pretty sure BMW's S1000RR, when it was launched at Portimao in 2009, had a similar sort of system. Now, it may not have been graduated It may just have been like a step change, like a set angle, but definitely I remember riding it around Portimao, coming out of some of the slower corners and giggling to myself because I deliberately hold the bike leant over, open the throttle, and then as the bike came upright, the bike would begin to accelerate harder. The engine would, it was almost like it was coming on cam. So there may be some sort of, again, nuance is another word that we use a lot with this bike. It might be sort of some nuance control that Suzuki can claim as a first, but generally that principle, I'm sure other manufacturers have used it as well, and maybe just not mentioned it quite as significantly. Suzuki do have a little bit of previous for sort of mentioning old technology as if it's brand new. But anyway, so there we go. So that's traction control. Yes. Now those three elements of traction control, anti-wheelie and roll torque control, are kind of bundled together under the TC heading. So you can't adjust them separately, but you can adjust them overall. There are 7 sort of different settings, and there's another off as well, so there's 8 altogether. And those settings, again, are all bundled into the ride modes. Wow, it's complicated. But for example, you can't dial back the traction control but still have anti-wheelie. It's all clumped together. But is that not enough complication for you? It all comes under your different modes. It's all customizable, which again is slightly odd because the bike remembers what you've done ignition off. So for example, if you're in, I don't know, so I'm in B mode, which is quite pleasant throttle response and, you know, standard. To be honest, it's kind of the middle. It's like the middle of everything. And for this kind of riding, I guess that's what you want. You can actually go in and tweak it to your preference, and it'll remember it. But there is also a user mode, so there are 4 modes altogether. I can't really see the point of a user mode if your actual main modes are also customizable. But anyway, never mind. It's a small point. There's one final thing actually to say about the suspension, which I'd forgotten to mention. These little fellas down here. So in terms of preload, manual preload at the front. Fortunately, you have to drag out your Allen key or your hex key because it's at the bottom of the fork. Preload at the rear, which is where it really matters when you're sticking a pillion and boxes on. That is automatically adjustable. You've got an auto setting where it detects the payload and adjusts for itself. Or if you wish, again, you can have a manual setting, which is what I've done here, and set it up for a rider with a pillion. A little bit more preload, as we know, tips the bike a little bit on its nose and just gives it a bit more of a kind of front end feel. Suzukis do tend to sit really flat, and this one's no different actually. If you just ride it on standard preload, the front does tend to just sort of do have to force it to turn a little bit. It does have a little bit of sort of, is it understeer or oversteer? I'm never quite sure. Whatever. Speaking of understeer, oversteer, wobbling free, let's talk about stability, because that is a big issue. Basically, when you get a 150 horsepower engine and you shove it on long suspension, stability at high speed becomes an issue. And then how you mitigate that instability is one of your engineering challenges. So for example, some manufacturers limit their bikes top speed. So if we go to, say, Honda's NT1100, I'm sure the Africa Twins are the same, Yamaha's Tracer 9, and even Triumph's Tiger 1200 Rally, all limited to around about 134, 135 miles an hour. Now you might say that's completely irrelevant on modern roads. I remember a time when we would have been up in arms if our bikes were restricted by that much. I remember when we complained when they were limited, inverted commas, to 186 miles an hour. But anyway, 134 is all you get. But with the Suzuki, you get 155. That's your lot. So it is limited to 155, which is plenty. But that is an indication they don't really want you to go much faster with these big panniers on. And I'll actually get to the equipment, the trim spec, in a minute. The panniers aren't standard. I'm sorry that you're looking at the back of a GT all the time. You should be looking at the back of a GX, but Suzuki, everybody likes to manage stuff, so the route is prescribed by Suzuki, and they wanted a certain number of miles on this type of road and a certain number of miles on that type of road, and they for some reason put all the guide riders on the GT, and then probably hadn't assumed that we'd be filming them all. But anyway, organising these launches is a thankless task. You can never get it right. Sorry, lifting the curtain a bit there, but But yes, anyway, what was I babbling on about now? I've done preload, haven't I? Yes, stability, that's right. So, let's talk about Suzuki's strategies for keeping this bike stable at speed. Number one, limit top speed to 155. Number two, when it gets above 120 miles an hour, again, you could say it's academic, the suspension automatically moves to a medium setting. So it sort of defaults to what Suzuki considered to be the safe setting. And again, that's probably just to make sure the bike remains stable. So that's the second thing they do. The third thing, I guess you could say, the roll torque control is another sort of stability feature. And then they've got an interesting one. Now, I'm sure I've heard of another manufacturer doing this. I'm going to have to go back and check my records. I'm sure it's not the first time I've heard this, but there is an anti-wobble mode. So above 80 miles an hour, the bike will, if it detects an oscillation or a wobble, it will roll off the throttle. It doesn't actually brake, but it does slow the bike down if it detects it going a bit wobbly. It might have been Yamaha's Tracer 9, you know. Just have to check. I'll put it on screen if I can find out. Anyway, so above 80 miles an hour, it backs off if it gets into a wobble. Now, I said to the engineers, how do you define a wobble? What's a wobble? And I made some motions with my hands, and I said, see if I can get my hands off the bars here. And I said, so is a wobble, is it this? Is it like that? Or is it more of this? And they said, yeah. They got their hands and they said, it's more like this. It's more of that. So it'll be interesting when we get the bike back in the UK on some really bumpy fen roads where we can cut loose a bit and find out exactly at what point the bike begins to, you know, say it's had enough and slow you down when you're over 80 miles an hour and you're getting a bit of a weave on. Because that does happen out in the fens occasionally, so I'm told, allegedly. Anyway, so that's the sort of all the anti-wobble strategies, and you know, keep the bike stable. Oh god, there is one more actually. The bike doesn't come with a top box. You can't buy an accessory top box because, again, presumably that pushes it into an area that brings the speed wobble closer. And again, that is a familiar thing. There are plenty of bikes that I've ridden before with top boxes and panniers that get a bit of a speed wobble on when you're boogieing on. So, sorry, I'm talking, mate. I'm talking. Oh, it's come off. Oh shit. Oh well, I've lost my toll thing. What can you do? No, that's a shame. We're going to be going through toll booths and they were supposed to have a toll thing on our arms, but it's gone. Thanks, John. Cheers, mate. Thank you. Right, so another thing on launches. Here we go. Hey, Francesca, my thing's come off. So anyway, yes, right, where was I? So, speed wobbles. I think we better stop talking soon because things are getting a bit hectic around here. So where were we? Yes, speed wobbles, we've done that. Let's do the price and I can shut up and carry on riding this bike. Price is... Now Francesca's in the way of someone. It's all kicking off. Price is £14,499, which is pretty good, but it's in a kind of a base spec. Obviously you get all the electronics for that. What you don't get is heated grips, and you don't get the panniers. The panniers are a 1,200 quid extra, same price as they are on the GT. That gets you the panniers, colour coding, the locks and the little clips that hold them on. You do get the quick shifter, stand is extra. I'm going to talk about the rivals at the end of the day, partly because, oh look, there's a big bridge over there, very pretty. I wonder when my thing went. Oh, I know when it fell off, when I was doing my wobbly arm thing. Oh, there we go. So yeah, £14,499. It's not a bad price, that. But like I say, I'll talk about its spec versus its rivals later on when we finish this ride. For now, I've talked for long enough, and I'm sure you're thoroughly bored, so I shall be quiet and get on with the rest of this ride and come back to you later on.
That has been a fascinating 2 days riding Suzuki's 2024 GSX-S1000GX. It's actually getting pretty late now. I don't know if you can tell on the video, but it's starting to get a bit dark here. So I'm going to rattle through this as quick as I can, and I'll try and make as much sense as I can. As I said while I was riding along this morning, rattling through the spec, I'm not going to go through specs again now. I'm going to try and restrict myself just to how this thing feels to ride and what my views are. And it is slightly ambivalent. Normally at this point I'd be frothing and fizzing and bubbling about the fantastic ride. I'm glad we've had 2 days, because it's taken me 2 days to really try and figure this bike out. So for example, on the first day, we did a lot of stop-start riding, a lot of photo shoots, didn't really get under the skin of the bike, didn't really understand it. My head was spinning full of the electronics and the suspension, trying to work out how it felt and balance everything together. Nah, I didn't really get a good vibe for it. Today, I've been riding on the motorway. We've done nearly 160 miles, I think. We've done motorway miles, we've done some twisty coastal roads. Still haven't completely pulled the pin, so we haven't gone loopy on it. I don't think I've been over 8,000 or 9,000 RPM. We haven't had the space, there's been too much traffic, and frankly, we haven't been riding that fast. That's just the way it has been. So, in terms of it's kind of like, I suppose you could say it's a good thing, because normally on one of these launches you'd be absolutely pinned for a lot of the time, and that does tell you some characteristics about the bike, but there is some stuff that you don't find out because you do spend a lot of time at full throttle and concentrating on riding. Anyway, having said all of that, all my excuses, let's get into the things that you can't tell by looking at the spec. First thing is the riding position. Didn't even mention that this morning, so I better go through that really quickly. Okay, so it's a tall rounder, which means you haven't quite got the same sort of legroom that you do with, say, an adventure bike. You haven't got the width of the bars that you do with an adventure bike. Some of those are like rowing a canoe. This thing, it's a much more sporty, much more compact riding position. It is, however, more spacious and more upright than your sports tourers and your sports bikes. So it's not hard to imagine if that's your adventure bike sat up right here and that's your sports bike over here. This is pretty much in the middle at the sporty end. BMW quote their S1000XR as a sports bike, or they put it in their sports category. So it kind of gives you some indication of where the manufacturers think these things sit. So yeah, sorry, riding position, where were we? So today I've been riding with the optional aftermarket seat, the comfort seat I think they call it. It's got some nice embroidery on it and some little pinstriping here. It's made up of 2 types of foam, but it is the same kind of shape I think as the standard seat. Yesterday riding the standard seat, didn't get all day on it because we were on and off the bike so much. Didn't intuitively feel particularly comfortable. It feels quite narrow and it feels quite spongy. It's like a spring with no damping. It just sort of bounces around a bit. It's not the best. This is much nicer because it's 2 layers of foam, one hard, one soft, and it does feel firmer, which is actually quite a good thing, I think, but it is still quite narrow. So it wasn't aching today, but it reaches a point where you go, yeah, I know I'm sitting on a bike, and then it kind of holds it at that level. It doesn't get any worse. A softer seat will actually, after a long, after an extended period, be agony. So seat is worth getting. I'm not sure about the size of the pillion seat. Doesn't look very practical to me, but then I don't often sit pillion. So, I definitely check out that if you take a pillion frequently. Let's quickly talk about screens, because I've got the feeling that manufacturers have got to the point now where they don't really care what the screen is, because it's a bit like they used to do with exhaust cans, because everybody takes them off and throws them away. They don't bother designing them too nicely. And with screens now, they're almost like, yeah, we'll put a screen on it, but we know you're going to put a pooch screen on it, or an MRA flip up, or a pyramid plastic screen, or a power bronze screen. With this, we're adjustable in 3 positions using an Allen key, so it's not it's a roadside job or your garage job, to be honest. And in its low position, which is how I had it yesterday, the buffeting sort of hits you here, not in the head, which is good, but it is quite noisy, so it's quite a sporty screen. With the screen up today on the motorway, definitely lifts that buffeting up to around about the helmet, so you can hear it, you do get a bit more buffeting. It's not dramatic at the kind of speeds we were doing. When I dipped my head by about 3 or 4 inches, it got really good, the noise went away. So if I was 3 or 4 inches shorter, I'm 6 foot, then maybe that would be just what you need, because your eye line is just over the top of it. However, if I was 3 or 4 inches shorter, I probably wouldn't be able to fit on this 845mm seat. So, swings and roundabouts, which kind of brings me on to another thing. It's like, you can't build a riding position that suits everybody. There isn't such a thing as a one size fits all, because we're all different shapes. It's the same story when you get down to bike electronics and engine management and semi-active suspension settings. Because the idea, I think, of semi-active suspension is to try and isolate the bike and make it hover over ripples and bumps, but at the same time offer support under weight transfer when you're braking or accelerating. which is fine in principle. But the trouble is, A, roads vary. Okay, we'll give you 3 different maps then. We'll give you 3 different types, 3 different modes of semi-active suspension setting. Okay, that's fair enough. But then you get in a position where actually riders have different preferences too. And this is particularly true, not so much as semi-active, but when it comes to rider modes and engine and power delivery and the way it manages its engine, riders do so many different things. I ride in ways that would make your hair curl probably, but it works for me because I'm still here 30 years on and it's working. You've probably got your own particular riding styles. There's things that you do that I would think were crazy. They're perfectly legitimate. The trouble is, you poor blokes at the factories trying to design engine software, they've got to try and make something that works when you're riding it and that works when I'm riding it. Good luck to them for that. So anyway, we'll come back to that. Let's talk about it now, actually. So basically, you have these 3 broad areas of electronics on this bike. You have kind of the throttle response and the main riding mode. I prefer A, which stands for active, I think, or you could call it aggressive, because it is quite snappy, which I'm not all that keen on, but it does give you the full fat of the engine, which is kind of what I want most of the time. So I tend to have it on A mode. Great, so we've sorted that bit out. Suspension wise, I found that medium was best for me because if I put it on hard setting, it was too choppy. Now hard is supposed to be choppy suspension or harder suspension, more damping, but better machine control. I found on the sporty riding on the coast road, when we did start to open up and go for it a little bit, powering into the corners, the suspension was too hard. It was chattering, so I could feel it, and it was putting me off. It was too much feedback. Might be the tyres. These Dunlops are not the best tyres in the world. Why manufacturers launch bikes on tyres that aren't absolutely mint, I've got no idea, because they put all the effort into building this and then they go and ruin it by putting on some fairly ordinary tyres. But anyway, that's how it is. So anyway, on hard setting, not my favourite. So on soft setting, it's okay, but you know, you do get the feeling that it is a little bit of a hinge in it sometimes. So medium setting is where I put it. That is where I would leave it all the time. That could be true of anybody else's semi-active suspension. So, okay, that's the damping part of it. The engine control part of it, I also have a bit of an issue with. So you have these 3 kind of little bundles, as I explained earlier. You have traction control. Well, that's fine. I want my traction control at about level 3. That's where I think I've got a bit, but I haven't got too much. It's not going to slow me down, so kind of that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, that means I've also got wheelie control at a level 3. Well, fair enough. I'm too old to go around pulling wheelies these days, so I'm not, whatever that is, that's fine. But then you get the roll torque control, and that's also set to level 3. And now we start to have a bit of a problem, because the one thing we really want, and I think we all want this, whatever our riding style, we want it to be the same every time we get on the bike. Give me consistency. When I open the throttle, I want the same stuff to happen. And when you get into roll torque control and you're at a particular lean angle, you open the throttle, depending on the preciseness of that lean angle, which can vary, you will get a different throttle response. You get a different engine delivery. And that's not always a good thing. In fact, it's never really a good thing. Now, I'm not saying it's dangerous. I'm not saying it's a problem. All I'm saying is you really want consistency. You want to know what you're getting every time you open the gas and you go to a certain point. I'm not entirely convinced that you get that from this. So I'd quite like to take the roll torque control and maybe turn it off and see what it feels like with it off. But still have my traction control, still have my anti-wheelie. Haven't got that option. And that's what I mean about the one size fits all. We all ride differently. We all have different ideas. I'm not entirely convinced that it's perfect. But anyway, I've rabbited on enough now because it is getting properly dark and I'm probably disappearing and going all fuzzy, which is probably a good thing. So I'm going to sum up real quick. £14,499. It's kind of in a sweet spot because it makes 150 horsepower, but also in its marketplace, that's comparatively well priced. The Versys is over £1,000 more, same spec. Versys, not as sporty as this, 118 horsepower, much larger, longer. It feels heavier, it feels more like a more substantial bike. It doesn't feel as energetic as the Suzuki does. Then there's the XR, which makes more power than this, but also costs a ton more as well. A little bit complicated to compare because the base XR comes with some sort of basic ESA, electronic suspension. It doesn't come with cruise control, and I think it only comes with an up shifter, not an up and down shifter. If you want to spec those into the BMW, then you start getting to over £17,500 with your quick shifter Pro and your dynamic ESA Pro and your cruise control. And that's like a couple of grand more than this bike. So that's, if you want this sort of power in this kind of bike, the Suzuki really is where you've got to go for that price point. The big fly in the ointment is Yamaha's Tracer 9 GT Plus, which you know I'm a massive fan of, and I'm trying to put that to one side. That engine comment I made about this thing being very linear and very kind of old school in the sense that it's an old sports bikes engine, so it has its performance balanced. The Tracer is one of those engines that has a lot of its performance wedged down at the front end because of its design, and it is fun to ride in a way that this is. It's fun in a different way to this. This is fun in a slightly more serious way because you have to be building up a bit of speed before you start to smile. On the Tracer, you just grin when it goes. The Tracer also feels more agile, it feels lighter, but those are kind of my subjective opinions. The thing you can't argue about, which is inarguable, is the Tracer comes with panniers, it comes with a centre stand, it comes with heated grips, and it comes with a radar up its nose. So it's got a lot of kit that this thing hasn't got that you have to pay extra for. And it's only 500 quid more than this. So around about 5, maybe a bit more, maybe 600 quid. So that's a bit of a problem. Yeah, I think the Yamaha would be its biggest rival in terms of its performance and its spec. But anyway, as usual, I've rabbited on for far too long. You know, if you want me to say something like, would I buy one? Would I be happy to ride one to Scotland? You bet I would. I'd ride it anywhere. It would be great. I mean, you know, 160, 170 miles on the tank. Actually, quite a bit more, actually, today. We were... I think we're on for about 180 miles out of this if we'd kept going. The fuel consumption was around about 46 miles per gallon as an average. So it's not noticeably different from the GT. Anyway, I'd ride it all over the place. It's not a problem. It's perfectly comfortable. It's great. You know, there's nothing that sort of stands out and sticks out as being awkward or unpleasant. Do I prefer it to a Versys? Yes, I do, because I do find the Versys is just a little bit kind of too long and too big, and you know, if I really wanted to take it easy, fine, but not for me. BMW is a fantastic bike. I've got a sneaky feeling that the sort of post Euro 5 S1000XR isn't quite as gutsy as the original. It does seem to me, to my head, to have a bit more of a hole in the mid-range, but you know, I think so. I'd probably go for the Suzuki, to be perfectly honest. Versus the Tracer. Nah, that's a tough one. After riding back to back to sea, I think I know which way I go. I think you probably know which way I go as well. Anyway, I've talked enough. So it's getting really dark now. I hope you can still see me. Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment. I'll be around for a couple of weeks answering your questions down below. I'm sorry I've forgotten to look up the service intervals and loads of other information, but I have got it all in there somewhere. Please like and subscribe. Yeah, I've said that already. Please, if you're in the UK, get your insurance from Bennett's. Please become a BikeSocial member. Take advantage of all their offers. There are tons of them. It is worth doing. If you ever go to British Superbike Racing, just become a BikeSocial member. It makes things so much more exciting. Good, right, that's it. No, there's one more thing to say. Thank you very much for putting up with me.
From the GSX-S1000GT, and you can see our lead rider has got oh dear, here we go, there's already drama going on, and we can see the lead rider has is on the GT. It's honestly, it's like going on a launch with a 5-year-old.